My name is Chris DeGore. Brett.
My name is Brett Brzee.
We're both senior solution engineers here at Salesforce. It's a really fluffed up title. Really what it amounts to is we're nerds. And we talk to customers, partners just as yourselves, and we try to get into the nitty gritty on how things go. And so for this session, what we're bringing to you is kind of a quick look at the three main types of architectures that you guys find out there with mobile applications. We're going to talk kind of how they actually work. We're going to talk a little bit on pluses and minuses of each of them. And we'll talk, of course, a little bit about what Salesforce does to kind of help you guys. So hopefully out of this, you'll get a little bit of tools in terms of like understanding this as a problem going forward. Now, before I start any slide, we have the best slide of all the slides, the slide that you'll see the most, the slide that my lawyer fiance is not interested in, so I'm assuming the rest of you don't really want to read the whole thing. But basically, buy whatever we do based on what we have today. If we come up here and we start talking about snake oil that might be happening in the future, don't believe that. Just don't buy based on that. We'll do it, but just don't buy based on it. Otherwise, I get fired, Brett gets fired. It's bad times.
Lots of firing.
Yeah, don't do it for us. I don't want. If you can't tell, I'm going to try to make this as unprofessional as possible because you guys are going to get plenty of professional PowerPoints this week, and I want to try to have a little fun. Some of my jokes will land, some of them won't. I will survive. So let's start with this, right? Building a mobile app. I'm going to show you two pictures here that should really hit home as to why everyone needs to already be building mobile apps. The one on the right is easy. It's a kid. Kids are using mobile apps. Kids are actually more accustomed to iPads and iPhones and Droid tablets than they are to laptops, which scares me because that doesn't even make sense in my head. But they look at it and they poke the thing and things happen. And at this point, some of you probably have some small kids, they may be poking like laptop monitors and asking why it's not doing stuff. That's a really weird feeling to get. I've had it happen, and it's eerie. More importantly, on the left are phones, and I owned the Razr for a little while, and I think I had the one before, the C720, but that's actually a museum with phones. So cell phones are not this fly-by-night thing that just hit. They're so prevalent in our day-to-day that there's actually museums already that have phones that we once probably owned. The Dynatac being the famous brick phone from back in the day. But now that you want to build a mobile app, you're going to hit probably the first big question about it, which is, okay, what is a mobile app? And really it breaks down into three main subcategories. The first is the one that everyone's pretty familiar with, I think, when you talk about consumer apps, which is this idea of native app. It is an app written in the native language of the device that you're running it on. So for iOS, that ends up being Objective-C and now Swift. And then on Android, it ends up being their version of Java for that specifically. And apps that are good examples of these would be the newest Facebook app, Spotify, but also Angry Birds, right? Games are typically going to be native applications for reasons we'll get into a little later. On the far right, going the other end, are what are known as web-based apps. So you guys have probably visited things like Gmail or Southwest or whatever, and when you visit it on the phone, it looks sort of like it's an app. It's styled in such a way that it interacts properly with a touch interface, it fits the small form factor, but it's not an actual app on your phone, right? It's not a tangible thing. The nice thing there is you don't have to download anything. You just visit the web page and you go with it. And so there can be a lot of value there. And then in the middle is this weird place called hybrid. And what this ends up being is a wrapper around a web app that allows the web app to have more native features, right? Accessing storage on the phone, accessing things like the camera and accelerometer and the compass if you have some business use for using compass. I've yet to meet anyone that does, but cool if you do, awesome. And good examples of that, Salesforce one is probably the easiest example for me to throw out because I'm paid to throw out that example, so I will. And then the second is Tapper, which I like because that lets me, Untap, which lets me track beers that I like and don't like. So that's me. I'm going to turn it over to Brett. And so what we're going to do is we're going to deep dive into each of the individual three, give you a little bit of a demo, a little bit of what's good, what's bad, that sort of stuff. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll come out smarter. Brett?
Thank you, Chris. So how many here are mobile developers? Who here would call themselves a mobile developer? Okay, so all of you people, this is completely, you already know all of this. You could deliver this presentation. Who here is a Salesforce developer? Excellent. Who here has never developed a mobile app before? Excellent. Okay, great. So for those people especially, this sort of information is hopefully very useful to you because many Salesforce administrators and developers are called upon to make decisions that go beyond Salesforce just because your executives know that you're super smart people with super smart ideas about how to build applications. So let's start off with one example that Chris mentioned before, which is a mobile web-based application. So a mobile web-based application is an app that loads in a web browser. You go on your phone to Safari if it's an iPhone, or you go to Chrome if it's an Android device, and you go to www.gmail.com, and as Chris mentioned, the Gmail app loads. And that makes a lot of sense. It's pretty straightforward, but what's so cool about these HTML5 and Java-based apps, or JavaScript-based applications, excuse me, is that with kind of the modern improvements to HTML, we're able to do things like caching. We're able to do things like complex graphics. We're able to create user experiences that are much more akin to a desktop-like experience and less of what people think of as a mobile experience. And so here's what a mobile app looks like. It should be pretty easy to understand. You're loading it from an external place into a web browser. And this is what it looks like. It looks like HTML5 and JavaScript and CSS, of course. And there are lots of advantages to writing applications this way. One really good example is that you can write the application once and run it anywhere because it's a web-based mobile application, just like a web page. You can run a web page anywhere. Of course, you have to account for different form factors, and when it's responsive, we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean if it's responsive? But it's pretty easy to do if you know HTML5 and JavaScript and you use new third-party frameworks. So there are many third-party frameworks out there like Angular, like Sencha, and these frameworks basically take away a lot of the effort required to build really cool user experiences. So you don't have to write the JavaScript yourself to make sure that certain menu items appear with a certain animation and a certain flow. And we can also use these JavaScript frameworks to kind of give us better access to what would traditionally be thought of as back-end capabilities, like caching. And when you're writing a mobile application that's really a web page, when you push an update to that web page, the application is updated. So your web app is instantly updated. So think about it. If you've never had to push an app through the iTunes Store before, the App Store before, or the Google Play Store before, congratulations. It's not, especially with Apple, it can be a very challenging process, and it takes a lot of time to move a new version of your product through the life cycle.
It's not great.
Yeah, exactly.
Super not great.
I thought there was like a chair dropping for a second, but it was actually you. So, okay, so what are the cons? Obviously, that whole upgrade process can take a while. There is caching. There is an ability to store records offline within the web browser, but it's not the same type of segmented encryption that you might be asked for in an enterprise, right? You have increasingly more and more capabilities through just HTML5 and JavaScript, but not quite what the enterprise demands. And of course, again, even though this is improving, you don't get raw access to those device-specific capabilities and functions like your accelerometer and your camera and other things like that. Now, of course, I'm sure people will say, oh, I have a JavaScript tool that does that. Yes, it's just not quite in the mainstream as yet. So what do we do at Salesforce to enable you to build web-based mobile applications faster? So we've actually created a number of what we call mobile packs, and these are kind of pre-developed components based on these frameworks that enable you to build an app that connects to Salesforce using one of these frameworks. Right? So we'll encapsulate, or we'll take care of some of the annoying things about building a mobile application like authentication, and we'll put that in a bite-sized chunk that you can drag into your application development project. We also have developed something called mobile design templates, which are a combination of HTML and CSS and JavaScript that you can drop into your own application. So if you're trying to build a list view of records, that's a fairly standard user interface element that doesn't necessarily need to be recreated. We've basically created cookbook code that you can go and use and repurpose for your own mobile application. Right? And since it's all HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript, it's very portable. And there are other tools that you can use to enhance your web-based mobile app development process, like Visualforce. Everybody knows what Visualforce is in here? Great. I saw no hands. That's really scary. And you can actually use Flow. You can take Flow interfaces and screens, and you can actually skin them to appear in a mobile interface and make them responsive as well. And there are other tools here that you may or may not have seen in the campground. If you have not seen some of the interesting new tools that we have available at Salesforce, I encourage you to review those tools.
Yeah, I don't even remember if we're allowed to talk about them yet, but they're there.
Skip that slide.
It's funny because there's like all sorts of cool stuff being revealed to you guys in the dev zone that on the campground they're like, no, we can't talk about this.
Yes, so there are some great tools out there that we may or may not have just launched that you should review. So, so that's HTML5, an HTML5-based web app. Let me just show you an example of an HTML5-based web app. And before I do that, I want to show you right at the beginning where you can go to collect the app that I'm about to show you. So on Developer Force, which is now developer.salesforce.com, there is a mobile services section. And if you want to explore what it's like to build an HTML5-based web app, and you want to look at what that would be like given these different frameworks that are available, we actually have this on our website today. You can select the framework of your choice, and we'll walk you through what it's like to create that application. Actually, we'll just give you all the code, and you can set it up. And ideally, you'll use that as a kind of jumping point, as a way to develop your own applications. And so you can start to understand what it is exactly that we're contributing to your app. So this is a contacts app. We develop the same contacts app regardless of the framework you select. So this is what it looks like. It's very simple. It's very basic. And this appears on a mobile device or on a tablet or on a phone the same way as it does here in this screen. In fact, as you would expect of a responsive application, if I extend the size of the screen, the view automatically changes. And it's a very fast, clean user experience, whether you do it on the phone or in a browser or somewhere else. And so with using Angular, which is this example right here, we're actually able to build really clean, fast, responsive user experiences. And those components load when you first go to the web page. Those components load and then stay in the browser running, right? And so what are we doing? What's changing? It's data. So we're making a REST API call to pull this list of contact records, but we don't have to worry about refreshing pages, which is actually now a very old paradigm, right? And that's one thing that Angular does very well. There are a lot of other frameworks that do very similar stuff, and we're giving you kind of the tools to do that yourself. Just so you can kind of get a feel for what this looks like. Here's the Visualforce page that makes up the index, which is kind of one of the container pages for the demo that I'm showing you. And it shouldn't look too scary. It's mostly HTML and CSS and references to lots of other JavaScript libraries.
So to be clear on kind of where Salesforce fits in this whole architecture, right? Open the app real quick. You know, we didn't design that app. We didn't make the squares, and we didn't even make it responsive. Which one? This is Angular, right? Angular already did that for us. Really what we're providing you is Visualforce, and we're providing you that stack to run this on, so you can drop in whichever of these language packs you want. If you want to use jQuery mobile, do it. It's going to save you a ton of time than writing your own CSS and HTML and JavaScript by yourself. And if you can do that, it's all about being able to get to the end result a lot faster, right? Like, yeah, okay, maybe you don't really want it to look like the default UI that you get from some of these packages, but if this gets you to your users quick, there's your V1. Let your users then complain that they want X, they want Y, they want Z. And the nice thing is we will continue to evolve Visualforce in such a way that you keep using whatever the latest and greatest tech is on it, as opposed to you having to wait for us to do the Angular release of Salesforce.
Make sense? Excellent.
And then how many of you have used Flow? Oh, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Flow is the underused gem of mobile development right now. Check it out. It's really cool. It basically is a point-and-click builder for wizards and multiple web pages, but what's neat is you can actually embed Flow within a Visualforce page. And what that means is that content will actually be on the DOM of on the actual document of your Visualforce page, which means you can style it, you can add JavaScript, and you can actually bring it down to the form factor for a phone. And you would have admins who will never touch a lick of code able to actually drag and drop and create their own custom flows. And that can be really, really powerful, because then for you guys as devs, you put together a CSS pack, you hand it to them, and you say you're good to go. And let them run and let them build the stuff, and you can kick back, I guess. I don't know. Do devy stuff. I'm a lazy dev, so that anything I can do to make other people do work, yeah, I'm all about it.
Right.
Not you. You're good.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Not lazier than you. So HTML5 web-based application is very useful. It allows you to get to market faster. It's faster to develop. If you know front end, it's not too much of a leap to connect your skill set to building something that makes a call to Salesforce. Pretty straightforward. So now let's transition over to hybrid. So a hybrid, as Chris kind of alluded to, is a really convenient way to architect applications using all the stuff we just talked about, everything, all of the HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript and the Angular and whatever framework it is that you prefer, while still getting some of the inherent benefits of a native application, which Chris will get into in detail in a bit. And so suffice to say there are two different kind of sub-flavors of a hybrid application. So the first I'm going to talk about is a local app, or what I call the thick shell. So a local hybrid application has a native shell, a native container, a container that was written to run on the operating system of the mobile device you're using. And within that shell, we run an HTML5. I keep saying HTML5. It could be, in theory, it could be HTML4, but we're going to say HTML5-based JavaScript-based application, and it's going to be visible through the OS's standard web view. And the OS's standard web view is actually not Chrome and it's not Safari. It's very close to Chrome and Safari, but the web view is the inherent OS level web view is not that. And the reason why I mention that is because if you are manipulating components or making sure that each of the views is the same across different mobile browsers, because you're also using this as a web-based mobile application, you will have to keep that in mind and account for discrepancies. So in any case, the great thing about a local app or hybrid local architecture is that those files, the CSS and the HTML5, are actually running, they're included in the package when you install the app on your device. So when you download it from the Google Play Store, you get all of the framework components, the visual components, all of that is included in the package. And so this enables us to behave just like a native app would. We're able to connect directly to other APIs. We're able to connect directly to Salesforce. We're able to perform device-specific actions like capture something from the camera or get some GPS information or get some telemetry on our accelerometer. And we're able to kind of transact between our JavaScript and this container because of the kind of inherent benefits of that container. In the Salesforce mobile SDK, we use something called Apache Cordova. Some people have heard of PhoneGap. PhoneGap was the company that originally created this tooling, this container that allows you to connect to the services of the native device using an abstracted call. So you can call always the same way using your JavaScript and HTML5 to get a picture from the camera. And Cordova will take care of figuring out what that means on an Apple iOS device running 8.0.2 of iOS versus running that on Android, whatever flavor or Jelly Bean that you might be using. So the thin shell is very similar to the thick shell, except that we don't have all of the components of the core app. We don't have the web pages and the CSS and the JavaScript preloaded. We get a package that contains the container. It's still got the web view from the OS naturally, but we load the application from the web at runtime. So we bring those components into the application at runtime, and this enables us to actually enjoy a few different benefits. Primarily, we don't have to ship all of our content, all the content that will be in the app, with the package itself. That means we don't have to run that by Apple's kind of reviewing authorities and Google Play's reviewing authorities. We can launch the core components of our app, and we can make the rest of them accessible remotely. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So I put some code here of an example of actually making a call to get to Cordova to get a picture from the camera. But in essence, when you're building a mobile application in a hybrid architecture, you're still going to be writing in HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript. So all the things that I talked about before are still relevant here. You can still write it once and run it anywhere. You can still use the frameworks. You can still access, or you can now access device-specific features and functionality. And particularly in enterprise, it's important to be able to store data in a very specifically encrypted file store that is kind of unique to your mobile application and not OS-level encryption. So there are some cons to hybrid architectures. Some people feel that a hybrid app is of lesser performance. There's a famous discussion by a certain social network that built a...
Yeah, you guys probably heard Zuckerberg go on record and say the stupidest thing Facebook ever did was create a mobile app that wasn't native.
Right.
I'm not Zuckerberg and I'm not Reg, but I think the stupidest thing Facebook ever did was say that statement. When we had the buggy, slow version of the Facebook app, you know what we had on our phone? The Facebook app. Like, you can use things like HTML5 and everything else to get to market quicker while you have guys in the back that are building the big native thing. You can use them as more agile ways to vet out your user stories and make sure everything you're building is something people are going to use, or just the UX in general, or the design, or whatever. And that's all valuable data that can go back to the larger thing. But the alternative would be, okay, so we just go to the one big development cycle. Well, then we're doing it without all of this material, and our delivery date to the market may also be, months after the fact. So,
if
and
nothing else,
I'll get into that a little bit more. One thing on hybrid, though, that's important is you actually mentioned, these two different styles, right? Where you have one where all of the actual app logic is local onto the phone, and the other one where it's actually still located out in the magic cloud somewhere, right? That would mean when you have to do updates would be different, right? If it's all locally updated on an app, they need to update that app every single time. If it's located magically out in the cloud somewhere, you update the server, code's done. Much less updates up front. The second being, when you do the thin client manner, Apple's aware of the fact that you could say, hi, this is my kitty cat app, and then push it off to some crazy server and just serve up nothing but like hacking tips or all sorts of crazy stuff, right? They're aware that you could do that. So there is a limitation as to how much the App Store will allow you to make your app a hybrid remote app. To give you an idea, Salesforce 1 does have hybrid remote elements to it. If you'd load a Visualforce page in Salesforce 1, right, we don't render it locally on your device. That is still rendered on our server and then passed through. That's okay, because a lot of the other stuff is all native built, and then there's other hybrid local parts too. Right. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Suffice to say, it's worthwhile to consider hybrid application development. We've moved very far in terms of the responsiveness and the ease of use and the user experience. And if nothing else, you get 2 for 1. You're probably going to build a web-based mobile application anyway for your business. Go through the effort of building all of the HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript. You're going to use that probably on the browser-based mobile app version of your company's website. Use that in your hybrid app, and like Chris said, if you need to, in the background, you can be devoting resources to building a native application. So, how do we help with hybrid app development? All the same stuff I talked about before. In particular, our SDK, the container we're going to be using is Cordova, so we're going to give you all the components that you need to start building a hybrid app. The same SDK components can be used or will be used to help you build the actual web pages and the JavaScript as well. All right, let me just show you a quick example of what Chris alluded to earlier, which is Salesforce 1 loading a remote web page.
I'll hook that sucker up.
Yes, let me get this started really quick. Pardon me. All right.
One. You're good.
There we go.
Professional fade.
Yes.
Thank you, tech guy.
Thank you for the professional
That worked flawlessly.
This is a little squished. I don't know why, it just is. But as you can see,
it's a skinny iPad. It's cool.
Skinny iPad, yes, the low-fat version. So this is Salesforce 1, which we hope you all know and love dearly. One of the applications that we've created, which is really a combination of Visualforce pages and an Apex class, and of course some JavaScript and CSS, is the roll call application. The roll call application is a Salesforce Labs product, which as of yet is not available on the App Exchange.
Still going through security review.
Safe Harbor, it will be available for your free and public consumption.
Snake oil.
Safe Harbor, Safe Harbor. But this is an application that reads the campaigns that you have going available as records, and it turns those into cards, and it gives you some basic detail about your campaign. So I'll click into one of the campaigns here. Obviously, I'm in a dev edition org, so I only have 4 campaigns. This app was actually developed to enable people to run check-in for an event. And so if someone is already responded to your campaign or has received is a campaign member and you want them to be able to check in at your event, you can have them walk up to the kiosk running this application and potentially do what I'm doing right now, which is enter their email address. You guys may be familiar with an interface that looks very similar to this if you ever checked in for Dreamforce, which I hope you did, because you wouldn't be here otherwise. So we're able to click on confirm, and now we're actually submitting or committing a new response as an attribute on the campaign member within Salesforce, which is pretty cool. And more importantly, we can now take this information and we can review it in fancy, exciting charts and graphs, which are very useful for event coordinators or people who need to understand what's going on in real time about the event. And of course, we can also do things like produce a list of all the people who are attending. So when people at the company are saying, you know, oh, did this person check in? We can have somebody floating who can say, yes, this person just checked in.
I'm sure this is something that you guys have, you've been to events that are, they're not Dreamforce size, right? They're smaller events. They're, a room here or there. You've maybe even thrown it. And what do you do usually? You've got a guy with either a clipboard or an Excel sheet. And people walk in and they tell him their name, and he types it in, and then 3 months later that actually gets updated into Salesforce or whatever else you're using to actually do something with, right? Whereas this, you put iPads out. People walk up, they punch in. If they're not on the list, they can register on the spot. Right? And it's these sorts of small things that business is doing, right? And they're finding ways around it. And some of them are high tech and they go get some crazy shadow IT to pull it off. And some of them are the dude with the clipboard. And the more of these that you can kind of start using tools like this to quickly just deploy a mobile app in Salesforce 1 so they don't have to go find the app somewhere, install the app, get all the updates and everything. These are the sorts of ways that you guys can really provide them a lot of value with a very low investment.
So very convenient. So again, as Chris mentioned before, this is a Visualforce page with lots of styling and greatness and goodness to it. It wasn't loaded in Salesforce 1 when you downloaded it from the App Store. It was loaded when the user, with the correct profile and security rules, was able to see the app, tapped the app, and loaded the app onto their tablet in this case. So pretty convenient, pretty powerful. Let's show you an example of just what that code looks like. So here we are in the developer console. So this is the Visualforce index page. It's kind of like the wrapper for the roll call application. And right off the bat, you can see we have as a static resource the JavaScript, which makes up that page, right? And just standard CSS. This is not crazy, unknown voodoo that you're not familiar with. This is standard development nomenclature that hopefully you're fairly familiar with.
It's not Voodoo Force.
Not Voodoo Force, although that would be a great
that would be a
product
really good
idea.
Product name. Someone's going to come up with that.
And you can really take that idea at no charge if you'd like from this session. In particular, people are interested in how do those charts animate. All of that animation, all of the chart views, even the list views are components taken from a framework. They're default capabilities of the framework. Being able to animate and do all of that work and trying to write it by hand is not something people do these days.
Yeah. Let someone else do that.
Yes. So there you go. Let's now transition into your section, Chris.
Clicky.
There you go.
All right. So let's get to the hardcore stuff, right? So let's go to the other end of the spectrum, which is native apps. And so what's the architecture look like here? It's extremely similar to what we were showing with the thicker client, right? All of your code is there. It's sitting localized. There's an app in an app store that they can download, and there it is on their front thing. That app connects to whatever Objective-C libraries you need. Those libraries are doing anything from giving you an actual UI to making callouts to Salesforce, to making callouts into your firewall, into whatever legacy systems you got back there, to generic pictures that are supposed to, I guess, depict social media, right? Like, this is the sort of thing you're doing. Everything executes locally on your device and is just making callouts to remote systems. Pretty simplistic. It's very similar to like the old, client-server model from back in the day. It's just on a phone instead of on a desktop. As far as what the code looks like, some of you are going to feel way more at home here, and some of you are going to hate the look of this. Personally, it took me forever to get used to Objective-C, because just the format is so freaking weird. Oh my God, I've lived way too much in Apex and stuff. Whereas for Droid is all Java. So for those of you that are really familiar with object-oriented programming languages and grew up with like C and stuff, these languages are going to sing for you compared to adjusting to HTML and JavaScript and other elements. Now, as far as the advantages to going native, there absolutely are advantages. I would say that performance is going to improve. It just will, because you're using a lower level language on it. You're not rendering a page which is going through a whole bunch of other hooks on the backside. Offline is going to be the same thing as with hybrid. You have access to fully encrypted offline storage that is enterprise grade and enterprise ready. One of the other things, and you do get this with hybrid apps as well, is deployment to the App Store. So we talked about web apps, and web apps are great because they don't have to download them, yay, but web apps are also terrible because they're going to ask you, oh, can I get it from the App Store? And your response is, well, no, you go to our website. So that can factor into your decision. And that, I've seen that be used for the sole reason about going hybrid as opposed to HTML5. As far as the downsides, I will tell you, finding someone that can program Objective-C is a heck of a lot more difficult than finding somebody that knows HTML and JavaScript today. I didn't expect JavaScript to be like the #1 freaking language in, 10 years ago, but apparently it is. The other side is multiple code bases, right? We are slowly graduating to where more of this stuff is not this centralized web tech, but now it's this distributed different client applications, which means we're in a hybrid app. Maybe you would have to do a little rewriting or a little adjustment to make sure you fit all the form factors, right? But in this, you have to full-on rewrite your code twice if you're just going to the two main. That's not even taking into account Windows Mobile, which, despite all odds, is a thing, and BlackBerry, which, along with all odds, is still not quite a thing, though that passport thing was actually kind of cool. This can be difficult to kind of roll, and you actually may have seen this with Salesforce 1 even, with the amount that we have native on there, that there are differentials between the iOS release and the Droid release. So it's something to keep in mind that you may need a larger staff to be able to keep up with doing native development. Now, as far as my pitch on Salesforce here, what we really provide to help you here is going to be the SDK more than anything else. And we touched on it briefly with hybrid, but the SDK will also handle full native builds. The biggest things it's going to give you is going to be handling the authentication, the OAuth dance, and all that sort of stuff with Salesforce, but also the encrypted offline. So we use something called Smart Store. The thing encrypts once at your application level and again at the device level. So it's super duper secure, I guess would be the official way to say it. We handle things like push notes. We handle things like, God, what are some of the other cool stuff? There's this sync thing where you can actually access the object in code really, really simplistically. Like, they're updating this all the time, and it's a really good way to start your project. You get it, it's a node package, and you just say, create me a new project, and it'll just create you a net new blank project where everything's hooked up and ready to go. Very simple to use. This can also be augmented if you think of some of the newer features that have come out lately, and I think one of the bigger ones was Apex Web Services. You can use this to call all of our standard APIs, but let's say you have something complex you want to do. You don't want to call one hit to the account table, one hit to the opportunity table, one hit to the case table. You want to call once, right? And you can use Apex Web Services to, again, reduce the number of calls you're making. You have to keep in mind, anytime you traverse this, that's going to be delay time for your customers. And we're trying to minimize that as much as possible by keeping all the logic on here, processing as quick as we can, and then keeping these collected as much as we can. That needs to be your thought process when you create any kind of mobile app, regardless of the way you do it. Now, we had to move this section to the last part because I think I have the best demo.
He does.
I super do. I put this together. Just to give you an idea of the SDK, I put this together in the afternoon on, I think, Thursday. So that is not, oh man, that is an eye chart. Let me see if I can make that a bit bigger. There we go, I think that's sort of readable. Ooh, oh, we got mood lighting now. It's getting real up in here. Okay, so what's this? This is a whole bunch of Objective-C code. No one cares about that. You're all going to care about it real shortly, though.
Unless it crashes.
It won't crash.
Oh, right. It did crash.
Well, yeah, it crashed. So this is hopefully the stupidest demo you guys will see all week. Otherwise, someone in marketing has outdone me. But everybody knows what this is, I assume. It's Flappy Bird. Now, you guys may have noticed when I was flying and then I crashed, right, that there was this slight pause because I still haven't figured out how to do asynchronous work in Objective-C. What was happening at that moment is all of this output that you're seeing here. Where'd my little laser go? Ah, here we go. Up here, we're making a call out to Salesforce to authenticate against it. We're doing the OAuth dance. I'm passing it my credentials. I'm using a really janky developer way to do it so you don't have to see the whole Salesforce login part. From that, we're actually getting, where is it? We're getting the access token back. So now we can actually make calls into Salesforce. What I'm doing is I'm putting together this small package of JSON here, which is just giving up my score and giving up the time of day that it's happening. It pushes up, and then down here we're getting a response from Salesforce that says basically that we were successful, there were no errors, everything's good. Now, if I move this out of the way, where did my Chrome go? So now, if I look in my instance of Salesforce, as you can imagine, I actually created an object called Flappy Bird Scores.
Very important.
and there are my Flappy Bird scores. Most people that play this pretty much crash right off the bat because they didn't think so far ahead as to put a title screen on that, which probably would have helped. But basically what I'm trying to get across is not that you should build Flappy Bird and do it for the enterprise, because that makes no freaking sense, except somehow if you have my job, then it somehow does. Yeah. What I want to get across is this is really what the architecture looks like for a native app. So one of the things I get asked is, well, what kind of app can I create with Salesforce? Right? Like, you guys probably think that sometimes. It's like, okay, well, what kind of app can I develop with this? What kind of app can I do on a phone? This sort of thing. If you want to do Flappy Bird, you can do Flappy Bird. We are not generating any of this Objective-C stuff that controls the bird or what it looks like or how it flies or any of that sort of stuff. We don't want to touch that. You could build that in Objective-C. You could build that on Droid. You could build it with Accelerator if you wanted to, right? Any of those sorts of tools you do. We don't care. What we care about is the stuff down at the bottom, right? The stuff that's going to be calling back into a centralized database and pushing data or getting data and acting upon it. Like, we don't care about what happens at the lowest level. We care about what happens when you abstract it back up. And so when you guys are thinking about mobile, this kind of takes it in a whole new way, because the question then that you're asking now is, okay, so what's the answer, right? You showed me 1, you showed me 2, you showed me 3. Well, I don't have an answer on this. The truth of the matter is you should not focus on the singular app you're building. When you think about a larger strategy, you have to keep in mind that as soon as you deliver one of these apps, business is going to come back for 10 more, because they now know that you can do it, so why the heck don't we have this app and this app and this app? What you want to think about is how you can use all 3 of these methodologies properly in the right spot. And so I talked earlier about the Facebook thing, and if you can do everything in HTML5, that'll get you your initial design, that'll build your data model, that'll build all the back-end processes, that stuff you don't have to do a second time when you hit the hybrid level, right? When people say they want offline and they want an actual app in the App Store, and it's certainly not anything you have to do if you go native at the very end of the day. Everything's already being done. You got to market here instead of down here. And as you can imagine, since I'm paid to say it, Salesforce can do all those things. Who would have thunk? So when you think about this, please, please, please don't fall into the trap of focusing on the singular app that is the most important of the day. Focus on what that strategy is going to be long-term. And focus on, if it's not our platform, it's not our platform, but find a platform that'll support you across all 3, because otherwise you are just going to hamstring yourself in some form or fashion. And with that, oh God, we ran a little long. We've got a couple of questions for any queues that need to be aid. We are happy to hang out here for a little bit. The mood lighting is now over, though that spotlight is killing me right now. Otherwise, I guess, if you don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? We got a mic in the center. Tech guy was. You might want to do the mic. Just right in the center.
Here, I'll run it over to you.
You have 2 minutes and 10 seconds, and then you're just out of the room. Oh, you're so good, Brad.
Thank you. I mean, what?
Be careful.
So I'm French, so.
Okay.
What skills the mobile developer have to have? Have he to know Salesforce, to know the API of Salesforce, or just how the SDK works?
So what documentation is out there to learn it?
What skills should they have?
What skills?
Okay. So skill sets. Mobile, hybrid, you want web techs, right? You want guys that know JavaScript, CSS, HTML5. That's it, just right off the bat. When you start talking about native, that's where you want Objective-C for iOS, you want Java for Android. And I'll tell you, some groups, some of you may have more web devs than you have, object-oriented programming devs, like old school devs, and others may be the other way around. So I would definitely say, as part of figuring out which way you want to go, take into account what resources you already have. If I know C, I can learn Objective-C a lot easier than I can learn HTML.
My question was about Salesforce skills.
What skills should you have in Salesforce beyond that? Yeah, well, so you would, maybe not Salesforce specific, but you should understand standard REST, how to form a REST call. So you need to have an understanding of web services. Beyond that, it kind of depends on what you're looking to do.
Yeah, it doesn't end up being really Salesforce specific anymore. At this point, we are an endpoint and process to help. But when it comes to building the app itself, it's really a bunch of other technologies that we don't own, with the exception of the one that they'll talk about tomorrow.
So the REST call, basically,
yeah,
is the answer. Yes.
Yeah, You mentioned hybrid platforms like PhoneGap and Accelerator, but I didn't see anything specifically about other cross-platform technologies like Coney and Xamarin and things of that nature. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because
Sure.
it's really prevalent today.
Accelerator is a good example, right, too, of one that you develop once and it'll cross-compile to a bunch of different systems. Xamarin's one that if you want to use like C# that you can do it, right? As far as our take on it is, we have no horse in the game as far as what technology you build that client app with. None. We're on Accelerator's partner store, I don't know what they call it. Xamarin, we actually have one of those mobile packs that's around using Xamarin to connect to us. What we're interested in is more that what happens with the data that you're either accessing or creating as part of using that app, right? It's moving that up to the cloud because the value that we add then becomes now it's connected to everything else. You've got the social layer if you want. You can do dashboards and reporting and everything else. That's really where we play. So if you wanted to say use Xamarin because you've got a bunch of C# devs to actually do your development, cross-compile, cool. Use our APIs and go to town. We have no problem with that. Does that answer?
It does. I wasn't speaking more from a skills perspective, but just from a knowledge perspective.
You're speaking around who's good and who's not?
Not really. Like if you want to do agnostic, if you want to develop an application that's agnostic platform, generally speaking from a development perspective, what are the choices and benefits for those?
That's
It's a big question.
Yeah. There's such a big answer. I would actually say, because I don't want to get it wrong, Gartner does an all right write-up with it on the mobile. I would actually look for it, and it'll be out, I think, later this month or next month, is the Yankee Group. I felt actually did a better job last year of really breaking it down. Really what it amounts to is if you need to go multi-platform and you don't have the resources to have two independent dev groups and you don't want to waste that time, focus on what limitations are inherent in those things. Because keep in mind, if you do Xamarin, let's say, and iOS 8 comes out, you're now beholden to Xamarin to get you the update that you need to use the feature in iOS 8. So it's adding another middleman in the group. Aside from that, I don't want to get too deep into what specifics might be, because A, I'm 2 minutes fast, and B, I'll probably mess something up, and someone will yell at me like Brett.
Is there another group coming in, or do we have time for one more? They're coming in. All right, you come on up if you have other questions. But thank you guys for joining.
Fireside chat time.
Yeah.